Thanks to Sarah Jane there. Now, when Tim Farron was president of the Liberal Democrats, he described his party as like cockroaches after a nuclear war, i.e. they are a resilient bunch, he said, and made of stern stuff, and they will survive. Well, they'll need to be over the next few weeks. They'll be fighting for their political survival, having gone from being a party of protest to a party of government. And the Liberal Democrats spokesman, Tim Farron, joins me now from Kendal in Cumbria, and a very good morning to you, Mr. Farron. Let's stay with the cockroach analogy then. They crawl out from dark corners in the kitchen and people try to get rid of them too, and that, it seems, will be the case in this general election in the Lib Dems.
Well, I think the point I made and others have made as well is that we're a resilient breed, so we'll stick with that side of the analogy. I think my take as I go around the country, here in Westmoreland, but I've been out in the West Country, in South London, in places like Manchester, Southport and others, the response I'm getting on the doorstep is indeed one of clear Lib Dem resilience, where we have the strength and where we have infrastructure, hard-working volunteers, good MPs, good candidates, good records on the ground, then we're doing very, very well. Even, I don't want to get too excited because that would be rather foolish, but even the polls beginning to show some movement in an upwards direction for us. Because the reality is, this is an election where the Liberal Democrats really, really matter. Almost certainly there won't be a majority for any party. So what we need to decide now, do we want a government that includes moderate, competent, compassionate people like the Liberal Democrats who've shown they are good at government, or do you want people who are nationalists? Do you want people who wrap themselves in a flag, whether that be Salmond or Farage? And that is the choice people have to make now.
But let's just stay with the numbers. As we know, Mr. Farron, you're a plain talking man, and just in terms of the numbers, OK, the polls, you say, may be moving slightly in your favour, but you would be doing very well, would you not, on the national share to get half the votes that you got in 2010?
Well, I've no idea. At this stage, 5 years ago, we were on about half the vote that we ended up getting. So who knows whatsoever. And if I make any kind of predictions, then it's either arrogant or defeatist. So we're not going to even bother doing that. In the end, we know that as things stand, we're absolutely in the game. We're competitive, I would say, in more seats than we currently hold, which is quite an achievement. And we are surely in a situation where Britain desperately needs us. You're either going to get a Conservative-led government that wants to cut more than is sensible, causing misery across the country and unfairness, or a Labour government that's proven that it is not capable of governing without crashing the economy again. And add into the mix, you could get some nationalist or separatist who wants to wreck the United Kingdom. So what you need is Liberal Democrats. You desperately need people who are moderate, who are sensible, who are compassionate and competent and have a proven track record of government. And the only way to make sure you get that sensible element in government is to vote for it, and more people seem to be doing so.
I mean, are you saying there's been no damage from being in government, from being in coalition? Didn't you say that the Lib Dems would be tarnished for a generation?
No, of course. Well, I mean, many of us warned in advance. It was right. I, by the way, voted for us to go into coalition. I think it was right to do that. But many of us recognised in advance that this was doing something that put the national interest before the party's interest. And of course there's been an electoral damage. I'd have to be a complete idiot not to acknowledge that. But I think actually after 5 years, people have begun to see that what we've done was incredibly brave and incredibly good for the country. And that's why you're seeing an uplift in our support over the last few days and weeks. And so, yeah, absolutely we did something that was against our own interest, but in the national interest. Having said that, what will be in the national interest again after May the 7th is to have Liberal Democrats in government, and that will only happen if people do the right and bold thing again and vote for us.
So there is still appetite for government. I mean, there are those, and you must have talked to them as well, I've talked to some of them within the Lib Dems, who say, well, in actual fact, we might be better to have a time in opposition to rebuild our credibility.
Well, in a sense, that's up to the electorate, but I also think it's far more important that we remember that that can sometimes seem terribly tempting when life is tough in government. Just remember what happened to the Tories after 1997, or what's happened to Labour since 2010. Going into opposition to recuperate never works. It makes things worse, and you should want to be in power. There's nothing grubby about wanting power. Wanting power is about changing people's lives. Here in the South Lakes, we fought the Tories here so that we built 1,000 more council houses. They tried to stop us, we built them, and there's 1,000 families here who have a home because Liberal Democrats did right things and got into power. I don't think there's any such thing as a noble defeat. If you lose elections, you don't have have the ability to change people's lives, to build the green future we want, the millions of new homes that we need across the next 10 years, to be able to build a future that is fairer, so we give more tax cuts to those people who are lowest paid and stop the tax cuts that George Osborne has already said this morning he wants to give to the rich. If you don't get into power, you can't do those good things.
But also you need a recognised and respected leader. And back to the cockroaches again, after this election, you might be one of the only senior cockroaches standing. Nick Clegg, Danny Alexander and the likes might go.
Well, in any election, all of us, me included, it's a 0-0 draw at the moment in every single seat. And if any of us assume that we're ahead, then, you know, I would be arrogant if I thought that. So in every seat, we need to show the electorate absolute full respect, complete humility, and fight for every seat. One of the things I hate about this electoral system is that it builds complacency into too many MPs, and certainly in the two larger parties, that they just assume that their seats are safe, so they don't bother working them. And my job here in Westmoreland, and everybody else's job across all the seats that we hold and hope to hold, is to immerse yourself in the community you represent and want to represent, and show the electorate respect, work your socks off and earn every single vote. So if you assume you're safe, you're a fool.
Yeah, but it's right that the electorate know, and I'm sure you will agree it was right of me, for instance, to ask George Osborne about his leadership ambitions, given that Mr Cameron said if he wins he won't serve a full term. And the question goes for all the parties, don't they? Because we see your leaders standing up at those debates, and we want to know if they're going to be still leading the party in a few months or a few years' time. Now, if Mr Clegg does go, you would throw your hat in the ring, wouldn't you?
Well, look, the election we're facing in, 32 days' time is the biggest one for this country for many years, the hardest and toughest one for the Liberal Democrats in a generation. If I give any headspace whatsoever to what happens afterwards, then that is foolish and disloyal, and I haven't got the energy for that. My focus is entirely on making sure that myself and my colleagues up and down the country win as many seats as possible, because that's what matters for Britain. You know, you think about what the situation the country is in at the moment. We're getting out of the recession and the mess that we inherited. Whether you blame Labour or the bankers doesn't matter. What matters is that it was a horrendous mess, and the Lib Dems have helped us get out of it. But we're not out of the woods, and if any of us start speculating about what you might want to do personally in some, unpredictable future, that's really stupid. It takes your eye off the ball, and we actually have to work together as a team instead and make sure we get the best possible result.
Well batted off there, Mr Farron, about your leadership ambitions, but they're well known within the party. You'll be aware of what Paddy Ashdown had to say about it to me not so very long ago. Let's just have a quick listen.
I liked him. I think he's a great campaigner, but I think his well-known ambitions would be better served with a little more patience and a little more judgment.
So Paddy Ashdown knows about your ambitions. Everyone else does too.
Well, that was the Liverpool conference 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I ended up, and I hold my hand up on this one, getting quoted genuinely out of context, if you want to check the record, and so these things happen under a kind of a hot house of a party conference, but we're not getting distracted by that. Paddy is a mate of mine. We've spoken several times since that interview, all of them positive conversations, and I get back to the fact that we as a party acted 5 years ago, and throughout these 5 years, in the national interest. What is in the national interest is the Liberal Democrats are back in government and get a good result, because if we don't, then Britain is either going to lurch to the left or the right, or end up being in hock to nationalists or separatists, people who wrap themselves in a flag rather than wrapping themselves in Britain's interests. And so look, any of us who are tempted into discussing personal stuff, we'd be really, really stupid. Britain's fate is far more important than any of that.
All right, Mr Farron, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Tim Farron there in lovely